And let
Letting
them all
people
in.
Letting me go.
Hello, everyone. All right. Okay. No. I have just, okay, I think we're streaming live on Facebook now. Hello, everybody. I think, although I may have pressed end meeting. Oops.
It says you're streaming.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, let's hope. All right. All right, we're recording, everybody. Hello, and welcome. Uh, and thank you for joining us today. Um, please, just a note of the technical note. Please make sure you're all muted, including our panelists. Make sure you've muted yourself, and you can mute yourself. Although I'm sure we're all now totally savvy with the Zoom thing. Make sure you've the mute button is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. If you choose not to share your video, you can also stop video also on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. There's a chat option on the bottom. You can click on that and ask a question of everyone, or you can send a message to a specific person. Um, and feel free to use that. We are also, I believe, somehow streaming live on Facebook, although I'm not quite sure I know how that's working right now. And we will begin. Yeah, thanks. So today's uh, panel discussion features 5 artists who are working on brilliant installations for a show called Owning Earth that will open at Unison Arts in New Paltz, New York in September of 2020. This is part of a series of public panel discussions with the artists in the show that will take place every 2 weeks on Sundays at 4 p.m. Each panel has a theme. 2 weeks ago, we hosted our first panel on the theme of impossible futures and featured the work of Aaron Antonak, Soraya Park, Christy Gast, and Emily Houssard. In 2 weeks, on May 31st, the theme will be on visibility and restoration, and feature the work of Maureen Connor, Eugenia Manuelian, and Landon Newton, the 3 of them working on a collaborative project, Jackie Summel, and Jean-Marc Superville-Sauvec. The panel will consider how land-based projects can expose and even heal deep-seated injustices, and we hope you will join us for that. So hi, I'm Tal Beery. I'm curating Owning Earth, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Aaron Antonak, who's also on the call, is the insanely talented assistant curator of this show, and she will be managing some of the, admitting people and some of the Zoom technicalities. Before we jump into today's discussion, I just want to say a few words of thanks. First of all, to the staff and team at Unison Arts. What an amazing crew. Alex Baer, Alexis Agnew, Ali Bell, Rob Leitner, and Francis Wu. Thank you for your support of this project and to the arts in general. Unison Arts, like most arts organizations, has experienced significant challenges due to the pandemic. Absent significant government support, the arts system in general in the United States leaves most small and mid-sized arts nonprofits vulnerable to economic disruptions of any kind. And the pandemic has indeed been a major disruption, putting many arts organizations at risk. So, at the same time, arts organizations are absolutely critical to near and long-term recovery by supporting social cohesion and resilience, and in many cases, providing direct services to neighbors. So knowing how crucial they are in these challenging times, the team at Unison Arts has brilliantly adjusted their programming to meet the new needs of their audiences. And I urge everyone to check out their website at unisonarts.org and to participate in their other socially distanced art offerings. That's unisonarts.org, and I'll be posting links to that in the chat when I'm finished with the introduction. And so that said, I also want to urge everyone on this Zoom call today, as well as those catching this on Facebook Live, to make a contribution to Unison Arts. Any amount is good. I recommend $10. But if you have the means, please consider making a sizable gift today. I'll be sharing a link to the donation page, to Unison's donation page as well, in the chat. And so I'd also like to, before I begin, start by thanking another brilliant group of folks who I've had the privilege of working with over these last few months. That's Matthew Friday, Eliza Evans, Sarah Warren, Corrali Pizzoli, and Michael Asbill. They're the members of Unison's Sculpture Committee. They've been incredibly supportive and have helped to guide Unison's vision for outdoor exhibitions. It's a vision that is timely and inspiring, and I'm really grateful that Owning Earth is a part of it. Owning Earth is an ambitious 2-year sculptural exhibition that brings together an emerging movement of artists whose land-based works question and undermine notions of control. This pandemic has been profoundly instructive, I believe, in questioning assumptions of human mastery over our environment. But, you know, Arundhati Roy speaks of the pandemic as a portal. I mean, I think there's something possibly to that. But what lies beyond the mastery, control, domination, possession? How might we rethink and restructure our relationships with knowledge, with the non-human world, with the human world? The 20 artist projects in Owning Earth will be asking these big questions over a 2-year period, and will be accompanied by a series of workshops and performances that bring critical attention to these issues to audiences of all ages and backgrounds. Our presentations today are on the theme of material worlds. The artists on this panel are all distinguished by the ways their projects engage with science, scientific research, and engineering. Today, for some very good reasons and for some very bad ones, the value of science is being questioned as part of a larger shakeup that concerns the rethinking of conventional notions of expertise. These issues are paramount because they influence whether and how we can build consensus around some pretty hefty issues, particularly how we address major global challenges like climate change and mass extinction. You know, I can't stress enough how important I think these issues are. Brooke Singer will start us off, followed by Alex Young and Matthew Friday, who will be presenting a collaborative project, and then Colin Lyons and Robert Beck. Brooke Singer is an artist who lives in New York City. She works across science, technology, politics, and arts practices. Her work provides entry into issues that are often characterized as specialized, but to a general public. She is an associate professor of new media at Purchase College and co-founder of the former collective Preemptive Media and the current La Casita Verde in Brooklyn, New York. She's been a designer. She's been a designer in residence at the New York Hall of Science, a fellow at IBM Art and Technology. She's exhibited nationally and internationally at places such as MoMA PS1, the Warhol Museum of Art, Banff Center, Newberger Museum of Art. You know, her writing has been published in a bunch of places. Her work is in the collection of the Whitney Museum, Microsoft Corporation, and let's give it up for Brooke Singer.
Thanks, Tal. That was a very generous introduction, and I just want to start by thanking you for organizing these panels and, of course, the exhibition and bringing us all together. I'm super excited to be part of this, and I'm always very impressed by your thoughtfulness and criticality as you bring us together and challenge us, not only to hold space together, but to kind of share perspectives and stretch ourselves through doing that. The pandemic makes us all the more urgent and necessary, and you know, it throws kind of a monkey wrench, I know, into a lot of our projects, and the logistical end of things becomes very complicated. But I also think that it's really exciting for us to be together now. I love this idea that in a state of emergency is a state of emergence, and I think there's incredible potentiality for us as a group, and I'm excited to see what happens. So with that said, I will share my screen and show some slides of my work. Let me see. Okay, so do you see my name on the screen? Does that, someone nod? Yeah, okay, that's me. So I just wanted to mention a project that has been ongoing for a couple of years, and is kind of from whence the proposal for Owning Earth came from, and the idea for the work that I'm hoping to continue at Unison Arts Center, and that's Carbon Sponge. This is a shot of it in 2018, and I instigated the project at the New York Hall of Science in Corona Park, Queens, as a designer in residence. And the basic premise of Carbon Sponge is I built with a bunch of other people. It's an art science collaboration, but we built 24 test beds, and we're looking at the ability for urban soils in particular to sequester carbon as a means to mitigate greenhouse gases and increase soil health. So here's an overhead shot of the 24 beds. And here are some of my amazing collaborators, Pearl and Maha on the upper left, in the CUNY, the Advanced Scientific Research Center in Harlem, where we've been doing laboratory testing. Marissa Preffer, who has been part of the project from the beginning, on the upper right with me as we're collecting plant material. Some of the interns in the bottom, college interns at the New York Hall of Science, and Katari with Pearl at the bottom right, who is also a soil scientist and agroecologist. So this project includes a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds and interests, and also a lot of cultural institutions. We have a second pilot at Pioneer Works in Red Hook, Brooklyn, an arts organization. We've worked with many agencies in the city. We've gotten funding from Patagonia. So it's a real collaboration between different kinds of organizations and people. And here's just a little illustration of the carbon cycle, which is a product of millions of years of evolution. And this is like the nexus of carbon sequestration, where we're bringing carbon from the atmosphere in the form of CO2 into the ground via photosynthesis, where we want it to remain. But due to our practices over the last 10,000 years, agricultural practices, and more recently in the last couple of hundred years, through fossil fuel extraction practices, we've been messing with that balance and producing more or putting more carbon in the atmosphere, and creating this very precarious tipping point that we all know as climate change. So how can we change our land use practices? And some of you might be very familiar with regenerative agriculture on farms, and we're thinking about how can you carbon farm in the city? What does urban carbon farming look like? So it's part laboratory experiment that my science collaborators are leading. And it's also a toolkit that we're trying to figure out how we can create accessible and affordable tools to approximate the same numbers we're getting in the lab, to let people know, are they on the right path of carbon sequestration? And so that's really kind of where we are right now, as this participatory science toolkit. And it's all explained in this guide that was launched in earlier this year. It's available on the website if you want to learn more about the project. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because as an artist, I'm really interested in how do I signify, how do I engage people in these complex ideas actually in the garden. And the garden is a aesthetic experience. It is a place for workshops and participation, but how do we show and demonstrate what's going on invisible in the beds, or that these are different kinds of grow beds than you see in other places in the city? So we've done things like bury a scanner under the bed to take images every 30 minutes to do time lapse, creating portals in the beds so you can lift them up and see what's going on underneath the surface, and flags. Here's a still of the scanner, one still showing the root growth in this kind of strange human engineered soil that we have. And then the project for Unison Arts came from that thinking, but also the experience of being in a soil profile or a trench. And this is a common practice by soil scientists to look at the horizons of the soil. Being in one is transformative in many ways. I can't quite relate why, but some people have talked about the biochemical field or that you're 6 feet under, like a burial depth. That earth kind of hugs around you, but it's also being in a place that you aren't typically, right? Seeing something that's, for the most part, hidden, that's so close, but it's hidden from you. Here's a scientific image of a soil profile. So last summer, in the beauty of southern Vermont at the Marble House Project, that some of you might be familiar with this residency, I really started to think about this idea of signification, representation of the landscape, how a landscape is like an archive. And so Marble House has several defunct marble quarries on its property. And I started thinking about what a soil profile would look like if we took the above and below ground and how to represent all of the different constituents in this space. And the story here is very strong about the marble that was excavated, and then it was used to build the New York Public Library and other fancy places in New York City. And I was taking organic materials and inorganic materials. Here's clay that I dug out of the water. Here's marble that I crushed. And I was creating dyes and thinking about flags and how these dyes could represent the different parts. And we've got charcoal on the left. We've got berries from a honeysuckle bush. We've got some grass dyed pieces of fabric on the right. And there I am marching up with the final flag to plant it in the ground. And when I get back to New York City, this is Prospect Park near me, I did a second flag. And there's a result of that in kind of the late fall. So my thinking for Unison Arts, my proposal was to continue this project and to make markers of the sculpture park and places around New Paltz that have ecological significance to people, and think about expanding the project so it's not me responding to the archive of the landscape, but bringing in people to talk about their experiences and layering it together to create kind of a written archive that would then inform the material archive that is the flag. And so here's a quote that I'll end with from the artist Brett Bloom, who is interested in deep maps. And this is one way I'm thinking about this project too, is that making a deep map is a way to be conscious of a place in such a manner as to hold multiple layers of understanding of the present moment in a non-reductive and robust manner. This is from his text, Deep Maps, that you guys can find online. And I'm also thinking about conflating not only these various perspectives and layers of understanding in a non-reductive manner, but also thinking about deep time and geological time and how we can represent that, the past, the present, the future, and also the deep time past, and collapse all of these into kind of a study of place that then informs the flag making. So I'm going to end there. I had 7 minutes and I went over a little bit. I apologize.
Woohoo!
That was a whirlwind.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. And our next panelists are Matthew Friday and Alex Young. So Alex Young, I'll start with him, is a multidisciplinary artist and writer and curator who explores both humans and other than humans, how both humans and other than humans collaboratively shape their environments. So presently, Young's work explores rudderal futures or speculative forms of co-creation with species best adapted to thrive in environments distressed by human activity. His projects have been presented in many places: Conflux Festival, Flux Factory, Chiasma Museum, ACC Gallery Weimar, Stadische Museen Zittau, San Diego Art Institute, the Beyond in Western New York Biennial, Hallwall's Contemporary Arts Center, and quite a lot more. He's been doing a bunch of curatorial and editorial projects, and I recommend you check him out on his, I included his, I'll link to all the artists' websites on the chat. Matthew Friday is, so Alex Young and Matthew Friday will be collaboratively doing a project together for Owning Earth. And Matthew Friday is an educator and transdisciplinary artist who develops apparatuses and systems that examine and provoke new political ecologies. He has spoken internationally about ecology, aesthetics, and politics at venues such as NYU and Rubin Foundation. His essays have appeared in October, the Journal of Modern Craft, the Journal of Aesthetics and Protest, the Brooklyn Rail. He's written some, he himself and also the collaborative projects he's been involved with have put out some really fantastic manifestos that I encourage anybody who's interested in artist manifestos should really check them out. They're really phenomenal. He's an active member of the ecosystem research and design collective SPURSE. He's exhibited at Wave Hill, Mass MoCA, Indianapolis Museum of Art, Grand Arts, White Columns, Bemis Arts Center, Kunsthal Aarhus, and BMW Guggenheim Lab. So without further ado, oh, and Matthew Friday is also on the sculpture committee at Unison Arts. So welcome, Matthew and Alex. Woo!
Thank you, Tal, for that intro. So my name is Alex Young, and as you said, working with Matthew Friday, who I've previously worked with in a curatorial capacity for projects at MoCA Tucson and San Diego Art Institute with his collective SPURSE. However, together we're working on a project that I'm tentatively calling Solar Salad, which uses pokeweed dye in the creation of solar cells that will power an array of media, landscape, and horticultural projects. I'm just going to switch to screen share here real quick. Okay, so Solar Salad, this project comes from a mode of thought and production I've been calling ruderal futurism, borrowing the term ruderal from urban ecology and plants that thrive in human distressed environments, and looking at their resilience as a sort of guide for moving forward into communal and perhaps post-capitalist futures beyond economies and ecologies of extraction. On that note, this project is an indirect result of having visited the closure of the Bruce Mansfield coal power plant in Shippingport, Pennsylvania, which is about 40-minute drive away from me in Pittsburgh. There I noticed an abundance of these pokeweed plants that produce a lot of betadines, which are good photosensitizers. And they were just sort of thriving there amidst this sulfurous, neglected landscape. This later led me down a sort of search engine wormhole where I encountered a researcher at Wake Forest University exploring pokeweed for solar in earnest about a decade ago as a mass-produced resource for what he kind of problematically calls the third world. However, as far as I can tell, nothing ultimately manifested from this research beyond lab tests. I'll pass it over to Matthew and continue to guide the slideshow here.
Thanks so much. As Tal mentioned in his really generous introduction there, I'm part of a creative design consultancy called SPURSE that focuses on social, ecological, and ethical transformation. And we've been working for about the past 2 decades to empower communities with tools and strategies for system-wide change. And we come from a lot of different backgrounds that span the fields of art, of science, and design. And here you're seeing an example of Spurse's work that's important for the project that Alex and I are proposing. This is a project entitled Deep Time, Rapid Time from Grand Arts in Kansas City, where we were investigating how humans approach temporality, in particular, vast scales of time. And for this, we collaborated with the Salina Land Institute to help test out resilient sorghum, this type of grain that they were breeding to accommodate global warming. That's how you can do it. Next slide. Thanks. So this creative approach to exploring the intersections of social systems, ecologies, and apparatuses shows up in my project that I did for Waveville in the Bronx, and it informs the work that Alex and I are creating for Unison. This provisional laboratory that you're seeing here investigated the unique properties of rapidly colonizing cosmopolitan plants like pokeweed, what we normally call weeds. And next slide. And you can just start this one running. Yeah, there you go. So as Alex will explain, we're particularly interested in unique DIY technologies that allow folks to communally manage non-petroleum, non-extractive based sources of energy production, things that can be sort of owned and managed communally. And here you're seeing my recreation of a 19th century Stirling engine. This is a type of external combustion engine that I use to process dyes and papers that were foraged from local ecologies. You can do the next slide. Thank you very much. So using technologies like this, we plan to explore the way superabundant plants that fill our disturbed ecologies can be processed for papers and dyes. And again, you're seeing a couple examples here from Waveville. Next. And we're particularly excited how projects like these exceed the boundaries of science, of art, of activism, and reconfigure relationships between multiple agents. For our project at Unison, Alex is working closely with a number of scientists, as he mentioned, to prototype new technologies. Well, I'm going to be designing several community-based collaborations as well as some educational programming. All right, I'll kick it back to you, Alex.
All right, so I've given a very brief overview of Solar Salad, but I want to talk a bit about the do-it-yourself, or perhaps rather do-it-your-community approach to this project. So with kind of humble resources, I see this do-it-your approach as vital to the project, as much as a proper lab setting would be extremely advantageous. My thought here is even with what I or we can do with this, this may be quite minuscule. There's such an urgency or imperative to look beyond extractive carbon-emitting resources, economies, ecologies, and shipping logistics, not just within fossil fuel, but also within green technology. And the reliance upon minerals like platinum or ruthenium or complex manufacturing processes for silicon. I would also like to quickly tip my hat to pokeweed, not just as this speculative energy resource, but as a foodstuff, despite being very poisonous to humans and mammals. It's a sort of long-standing staple to the Appalachian dish poke salad, which is kind of the namesake for the project at the moment. And also, just for fun, it's under research potential in pharmaceuticals with what is called pokeweed antiviral protein. So if you or anyone listening knows researchers in this realm, I would love to talk to them. So I'll just very quickly share a couple of sketches of what this project could look like, but this is very much, I would say, a negotiation between materials, my processes and Matthew's processes. And I'm sort of the opinion that what this looks like isn't really important right now. But here I have an example of a solar array evolving from my observation of a lovely little plant called the red dead nettle. And here is a example of it in a field with a sort of pokeweed dye fountain as a placeholder for other things that this could be powering. So that is kind of where I'm at presently. I'm going to kick it back to Matthew.
Yeah, so thanks. One of the key components of our project is to think about, like, how do we become of a place? And, you know, as we know, the legacies of capitalism and colonialism have really led us to believe that all places are essentially interchangeable and everything can be bought. And we tend to think of places that we live in, especially urban areas, as these sort of failed ecologies where we simultaneously look to other places where, you know, we get our nice organically grown and safe produce. But this tendency to think about, like, the places we live in as failed ecosystems really prevents us from engaging with the important questions of space. And New Paltz, like all urban areas, is this really thriving and dynamic ecosystem that's been, you know, populated by cosmopolitan species that have co-evolved with humans over tens of thousands of years. So if we're going to become of a place, we really need to develop new techniques that embed us into places, the places that we actually live. Next one. So as Tal mentioned earlier, I'm part of this really great research collaborative, SPERS, and this is a proposition we've been exploring for several years, and Alex and I will continue to explore in this project is how do you become of a place? And one of the things that SPERS became interested in is that when you eat of the immediate place that you're in, you know, something really profound and important happens. Like when you eat a dandelion, whatever happened to that dandelion is really now happening to you, and you've got to start to care about it. So we've done a series of foraging workshops, pop-up restaurants, and collaborations that ultimately resulted in the publication of this book, Eat Your Sidewalk, which you can find on eatyoursidewalk.com. And we did an extensive project at Pitzer College. I'll show you a couple images of that really quickly at the end here. And we realized that one of the most direct ways you can get people to care about a place was to, like, you know, joyously eat from it and engage in it. And you just can't help but give a shit about your neighborhood when you're eating the plants and the animals that are around you. You know, again, what happened to them is really now happening to you. And foraging, using what's immediately around you, sensitizes you to these sort of unique possibilities of your immediate environment. So the project Alex and I are working on allows us to begin to explore some of these techniques of becoming interdependent on our own ecologies. Next. And like really quick here, these are a couple images from a really extensive multi-year project that SPERS did at the Claremont College's Pitzer campus right outside of Los Angeles, where we had the good fortune of being invited there to, over several years, to rework their 34-acre campus and work with the grounds crew, the staff, and the professors to come up with this massive what we call the multi-species commons that allowed people to forage from the area. So there was a interactive website where people could tag the different plants that were showing up, share recipes. Next one. And public signage system like you're seeing here. We worked to plant some plants. We changed some of the rules regarding the usage of spraying chemicals. We created a test kitchen. Next slide. Thanks. And then we repurpose a sort of national parkland signage to create these signs around campus. Oops, sorry about that. All right, and last one. So just for me to end on this quote here that I find particularly moving by Percy Shelley, I think the important thing about art is to think of art as a sort of, in a sense, like a voice from the future. And I'm thinking art here is like, not art as a discipline, but just creativity in the broadest sense, right? And that art in this sense has the possibility of thinking a thought that hasn't been thought yet, of prototyping a new mode of living. And this is what we're really interested in. And I think all of the, you know, the participants in this really exciting project that Tal has brought together have this unique focus. So thanks.
Cool. So my quick parting thought here is that with this project and those by others that are sort of like comrades in arms, many of whom in this exhibition organized by Tal, we might create a sort of subtle proposition of bittersweet optimism that our inherited world systems, be they colonial biopower, capitalism, modernity, can and will end, and that from the weeds we might emerge enriched. Thanks.
Wow. Nice. Thank you very much, Alex. That was that was a really great conclusion. You dropped the mic. Okay. Thank you very much. Our next artist is Colin Lyons. Colin Lyons grew up in Petrolia, Ontario, Canada's original oil boomtown. Fusing the chemistry of printmaking with site-specific installation, his projects reflect on geoengineering, urban renewal, and brownfield rehabilitation practices. His most recent installations have been located in sacrificial landscapes, such as Gold Rush era tailing piles in the Klondike, a decommissioned landfill in Cedar Rapids, a historic canal in Lockport, Illinois, and an urban brownfield in Rochester, New York. Recently, he worked in isolation on Rabbit Island in Lake Superior, where he began work on the Laboratory of Everlasting Solutions, which is what he's proposed for his Owning Earth installation. He lives in Binghamton, New York, where he's an assistant professor at Binghamton University. Colin Lyons, everyone. Woo!
Well, you know, it's just wonderful to be among such a great group of people and be talking about these really important ideas around, you know, art and technology and time compression, which I didn't expect to be part of this discussion, but suddenly this is, it seems like all of us are dealing with this. And yeah, it's just a wonderful collective project here. So I guess I'll work on getting my screen shared here. There we are. Can we all see it? All right. So I guess I'm going to start off just by talking about throughout most of my work, there's kind of three big threads that are that come up, and you know, one is that I'm a printmaker, I guess by training and at heart, even if none of the work that I make looks like printmaking. And so a lot of the ideas that I deal with kind of come from that that experience, the rituals that are involved, the chemistry that's involved, and end up part of it. I also often am coming at the idea of industry through history and sacrifice and the kind of idea of a extraction-based landscape and what it was for. And then finally, the work that I'm dealing with here at Unison and the projects that I'm going to show here are dealing with techno solutions. So oftentimes dealing with things like geoengineering, which are you know, pretty dystopian theories that may end up being part of the solutions or toolkit that we need in the future if we don't act in time. And so I'm just going to start off by showing a couple of past projects here. If I can get this going here. Oh. Tech issues, sorry. I'll go to the other one. Start. There we are. Okay, so so the first project that I'm going to show here is called Time Machine for Abandoned Futures, which was done in Dawson City, Yukon. And so for those of you that aren't super aware of Dawson City, it was the site of the Klondike Gold Rush, which happened in the last decade of the 19th century. And basically, there was this massive speculation in which you know, thousands of people came up to Dawson City through this pass, and most of them went home broke, having not really managed to find anything. But afterwards was when the really sort of heavy extraction happened. We have this kind of romantic idea around this gold panning period, but the sort of period of mass extraction happened afterwards when dredges came through and just started tearing up the landscape, rerouting all of the waterways, and we ended up now with this kind of strange intestinal landscape with these tailing piles that just fill the entire landscape around Dawson City. So in a lot of the work that I make, I'm often thinking about monuments and thinking about landscape and this kind of scars that are left. And so when I went up to Dawson City, this was kind of, I came up to this place and thought about this is representing the kind of authentic ruin of the Klondike. And so it's a place where they've got, you know, dozens of historical sites, but this seemed to be, to me, to represent what happened in that era. And so what I decided to do is to do something that I was, I guess, akin to a kind of quintessentially Klondike activity, which is to go up there and take a metal detector and just start panning for historic artifacts. And so trying to dig up all the tools and material that was left behind by the panners during the Klondike Gold Rush, and then collect them all and then build this kind of restoration machine at the top of the highest peak in Dawson City. And so this right here was a kind of printmaking based laboratory space that I constructed called the Time Machine for Abandoned Futures, which doubled as a kind of shelter, a DIY shelter, but also a restoration machine for restoring these artifacts and etching back into these artifacts as a kind of transcription process. And the rooftop there is all made out of, you know, find a detail here, etching plates and etching acid, which were used to power this machine. But part of what I was trying to do in this place was to create a way of compressing time, of presenting these, of restoring these artifacts from this boom rush or gold rush, but then trying to retranscribe into all of these artifacts any of the sort of historical documentation or historical memory that was lost in the restoration process. So creating these kind of strange palimpsestic maps where I was etching in any of the color shifts and any of the texture shifts from those artifacts. The other project that I want to show, in both of these projects, I'm trying to show work that similar to what I'm doing at Owning Earth, weave together historic and contemporary narratives about sites and connect with, I guess, more global concepts and technologies. So this second one was done started in 2017. It's still ongoing. I haven't made it yet, but it's a sort of proposal that should happen soon, which is in Cedar Rapids in Iowa. And so this is based on, it's a site-specific monument at a place called Mount Trashmore in Cedar Rapids, which was had this really, really interesting history of having been a shanty town. So right here was a shanty town called Stumptown for the meatpacking workers that lived over in this area. It had been a limestone quarry over here, and over here it had been a waste processing site. But at this point, it has become the town dump. And so what I'm also dealing with in this history is that this site here in the middle here, the Mount Trashmore, the top third of it is all this debris from this catastrophic flood that happened in Cedar Rapids in 2008, in which it was a 500-year flood, and it just devastated the city. And so what I wanted to create as a kind of monument that compressed that time, and but was also thinking about the compressing timelines that we're dealing with and the kind of ideas around catastrophe and catastrophe management that were in this time. And so similar to what I'm doing with Owning Earth is I'm dealing with geoengineering. So in this case, I'm dealing with a history or a contemporary proposal of ocean fertilization. So this is geoengineering, for those of you that don't know, is basically this series of what I think are pretty dangerous proposals to re-engineer the Earth. So they involve things like spraying sulfuric acid into the atmosphere, building 10 million water pumps floating in the Arctic in order to refreeze the Arctic. And the only one that's actually been tried is ocean fertilization, where they dumped a whole bunch of iron sulfate into the Pacific Ocean in order to build this large phytoplankton bloom, which would, in theory, enhance the fishery while absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. So what I've decided to do in this kind of bizarro geoengineering monument is to create a monument to this site where I've got this kind of series of glass capsules sitting at the 1,000-year flood mark, which have a valve in them. And inside these capsules, I've collected or a bunch of industrial debris, industrial artifacts from the site, and I'm dissolving those in sulfuric acid, but then taking those held in this capsule for the moment of the 1,000-year flood. And so when that happens, it will basically take the waste product, which is iron sulfate, and open this valve and open up into the Cedar River and create this kind of like very, very small microactive geoengineering, kind of I guess anticipated water fertilization proposal. And so with a lot of this, the work that's here is just a proposal for that and prototyping for creating these fluids and figuring out what will happen in these water samples. But moving on to owning Earth, the project that I'm doing here is called the Laboratory of Everlasting Solutions. And this project, I'm sort of taking on the role of a practical alchemist and thinking about how would an alchemist deal with these theories of geoengineering, and trying to imagine a laboratory which has, several highly impractical prototypes, which take base material from brownfield sites, tailings, industrial ruins in the Hudson Valley region, and try to redeem these materials and kind of transform them into the kind of, I guess, alchemical pre-materia for these geoengineering proposals. And so just for, so you guys have an idea of what you're looking at here, right here I have a kind of weird little eco capsule here that's designed based on a 1960s oil platform survival capsule, and the exterior of it is all intricately etched with some of these strange proposals that I'm, speculative proposals from trials to desalinate and refreeze Arctic waters, soil phytoremediation via invasive plant species, fertilization of coastal ecosystems using industrial artifacts, but describing these using alchemical symbolism rather than, typical, I guess, graphic illustrations. And so I'm not going to go too much longer because I think I've already used my 7 minutes, but it's a kind of strange way of kind of thinking about the geoengineering as, to some extent, a kind of modern alchemy, and the way that we're trying to sort of mimic or kind of amplify natural processes.
Thank you. Thanks, Colin. Woo! Hard to clap on Zoom when you're on mute, no? But just imagine all these people are clapping for you, Colin. One of the interesting themes that are emerging from these presentations includes kind of the skepticism for what are typically touted to be like the great solutions for environmental challenges. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's lovely that that there's some skepticism in Alex and Matthew Friday's proposal around, photovoltaic cells, for example. And I think yours in general, your proposal in general kind of casts some doubt on on the capacity of engineering and science to deal with what are, large, complex global challenges. I think that's really fascinating. And we'll get into that in the Q&A, which will happen after Robert's presentation. Robert C Beck is a multidisciplinary visual artist who works with biological media and technology to create dynamic installations of living art. He's co-founder of Studio Hydrostatic, along with Sarah Max Beck, a collaborative bioart research duo that has built installations for the Museum of American Glass, Urban Glass, Brooklyn Fireproof. He's been awarded fellowships at Wheaton Arts and Urban Glass. He's exhibited work at the Atlantic Center for the Arts, at Cornell Fine Arts Museum, Museum of Florida Art, and the Naples Museum of Art. He was a master printer for Flying Horse Editions before moving to Brooklyn, where he's currently researching hybrid processes that combine printmaking, photography, and cell culture within graphic art. Truly an interesting maker. So give it up for Robert Beck.
Thank you, Tal. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Wow. I've been looking for all of you people for a very long time. So thank you, Tal, for bringing us together. And the more that I learn about each artist's proposals, the more I'm blown away and honored to be working with everyone. I mean, this is especially in the light of the current situation. And I feel super fortunate to be part of the group. And so really looking forward to getting to know all and everyone over the course of the exhibit.
Happy to have you with us.
So I guess I'll try and share my screen here. It seemed like the best place to start is where we are. And this is out in a pasture where I'm currently staying with my partner. And it's essentially a glass plate, a solar panel, and then a small wetland ecosystem with water hyacinth and parrot feather and a few other interesting things that are growing. And I've been looking into it both microscopically and with magnifying glass, and I'm finding billions, or realizing that there are billions of organisms living in this little tiny thing. And the goal of it is to generate a print that is grown using cyanobacteria. So let's see here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. The print I have made, let's see here. Can you see that? Okay, great. So this is a first proof of the process. And this has been dried out and created an image using the cyanobacteria. And I've had fantastic ideas about this. I was like, I'm gonna grow my art and it's gonna be great. And now I'm realizing, after I'm looking and doing more research, that this is kind of problematic for me, because when I harvest this thing, I'm essentially killing, mass murdering billions of microorganisms. And that's, that's a bit of a conflict for me. But I I think that there's value in the research alone, and I have other ideas about where this may go in terms of its ability to be an art form, or potentially an inspiration for deeper research in the arts and ecology. So let's see here. I wish I had put together a little slideshow, but I was a bit lazy, so my apologies. The solar cell that I was using on that particular piece is, it's just a little tiny, thing I bought off of the internet. And I'm fascinated with solar applications in general. And one of the things, so I thought, well, what if I approached solar from more of a sculptural standpoint and started designing panels that took on specific shapes? And what then that sort of inspired was this design here, which will be hopefully be part of the system that I'm proposing to install for Unison, is a small solar array made up of these shapes, which make negative shapes, inverse of the shape of the panel itself. And the idea behind that comes from solar fields. And when we see solar fields, often, most of the time, they're obviously built and arranged for maximum efficiency. And it's a monocrop, essentially. So the ecology around, there is no ecology around the solar field. It's just for a solar field. And I see that inherently as a problem. And that, so I'm thinking that by creating an array that takes use of the negative spaces in between the panels, there's quite a bit of potential for actually a positive ecology while collecting solar energy for electricity, because plants are solar panels in and of themselves. That's just an overhead view of the project there, which I'm calling PIG, which is photosynthetic image generator. And it basically just cycles water between this tray and this tray, and the solar panel is running a little pump. So all this kind of was born out of some of the work that my partner, Sarah Max Beck, and I were doing with Studio Hydrostatic. And that was, so this was our most recent installation that we did at the Museum of American Glass. And what we were doing here is reconnecting our biological selves to an artificial ecology inside the museum. And that was very challenging, because there's a lot that goes into creating an ecology. And it ran for almost a year, like 10 months inside the museum. And we had arranged for one of the resident artists at Wheaton, this was at Wheaton Arts, and he was nice enough to come over and pee in the installation, like every other day. And we were monitoring the data so we could watch and see. We'd call him up on the phone and be like, hey, you need to go over and make a deposit. And, it was funny. All the ladies at the museum really thought that was interesting. So, trying to tap back into biology and our relationship to biology, science, and art. and let's see here. That greenhouse that was in that exhibit, oh, there's my timer, was on top of our rooftop in Brooklyn initially. And this was our first shot at trying to think creatively and inventively about art practice as it relates to biology and science, and where we fall in that, and how we can move forward in a way that is creating sound ecologies that are building versus destroying, and subtractive, you know, like mineral mining for our artistic materials. I have as much issues with that as I do with mass murdering billions of microorganisms. So as it relates to owning Earth, what I want to try and do is bring in the technologies like the solar and rainwater, and build essentially a resource station that could be, in theory and in practice, used by other artists and Unison, or even the general public, in an educational sense, and also a resource base by providing water and electricity. So that's where I'm at, and definitely super excited to have an opportunity to work outside. I've been really, like, every time I went into the museum to work on that installation at Wheaton, it's like, this thing needs to be outside. So here we go.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists. We are now opening the conversation up to questions. Robert, if you don't mind, could you unshare your screen?
Yes,
thank you.
I might need some instruction there.
I believe you can click on.
Oh, I see it. Stop
yeah,
share.
You got it? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so we're going to open it up to questions. If you have questions, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can post it in the comment. If you are, if you're on the Zoom, you can simply click on the group chat and post your question there. I have a question to start us off, which is just a general question. And Brooke, I would love it if you kicked us off with this question, with your thoughts on this, which is really just, when does the artwork cease to be art and become science? I know you've worked with a lot of scientists over time. You've had to think about this quite a lot. So I'm wondering if you would take a stab at that. And maybe all of you have some thoughts you'd like to share.
Yeah, it's something I think about, I guess, or is asked of me quite a bit, but quite honestly, I don't really care. Not to belittle your question at all. So for me, my practice has always been interdisciplinary, and it's been collaborative since my MFA in the late 1990s. So that's a long time. And I've always been really excited about taking things from one discipline and putting it into the context of a new one. And I feel like there's a really vital and productive space in doing that. It can't simply end there, but I've also noticed in the last couple of years, particularly with Carbon Sponge, how knocking on doors, or we don't really do that anymore, pinging people online, scientists online, results in a lot more responses than before, that there are scientists who are dying to work with artists, I think primarily because they realize the need for better communication and translating very oftentimes complex and complicated ideas into more tangible and relatable forms. And, for one example, Pearl, who is a doctor of soil science, just recently, she received her PhD. She taught me how to sew in the garden. We were making lab coats together. And she had a sewing practice in Portland, Oregon before, years ago. And so these kind of like moments of like switching, and I took really meticulous notes and really like followed the protocol. And at times she was like, just go with it. And I was like, these moments of like, oh, you're now the artist and I'm now the scientist, right? So yeah, I mean, to me, that's exciting. And that's kind of why I keep on going with these kind of projects. I do have a need to make things and to, like the flags are a very different kind of way engaging science than Carbon Sponge. And I have these needs to balance myself in various ways of, how I approach and execute and engage. But in terms of like, I guess one last thought too is the idea of the naturalist is really interesting to me. The most famous one being, Charles Darwin, right? And this idea of, but there's so many naturalists who, I think Darwin did not have an academic background. I have to check that. I don't think he was like a quote unquote academic. But they're naturalists. We can also think of park rangers as naturalists. So people who engage and care for and promote our quote unquote natural world and, engage in these various ways and, fluidly between the kind of qualitative and quantitative and observational and interventionist and kind of calculating and constructing and making and kind of letting go. That's all like, that's where I'm at, I guess.
I think that's wonderful. I mean, I think that the not caring is a really important, not caring about disciplinary boundaries.
Right.
Is just a key component of the artistic spirit.
Well, I think also the moment when I've gotten this question forever, like, why is that art in response to my work? And it used to make me a little bit uncomfortable. And now I'm more uncomfortable if someone does not ask me that question. So that's where I am.
That's great. Thank you so much. And we have a question now from Lucy. Lucy, is your hand is up. Would you like to, I'm unmuting you if you would like to say something. Lucy? Oh, wait, yeah, Lucy.
I really like the angles on those boxes, the dihedral angles on those hexagons. It's not that easy to do, make that kind of thing. Brooke.
Oh, Lucy. Let me find you. Hold on.
Not that easy to do.
Are you talking about the grow beds?
The grow beds, the boxes, the dihedral angle in the corner.
Uh-huh.
It's not that easy to do, to figure that out and repeat it.
I did
24 times.
Yeah.
6 times or however many there are. Can
That
you
was
talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I came up with this is where I'm being an artist. I came up with the idea and someone else designed and executed it for me.
Okay.
So I was interested in repeating the pattern at the New York Hall of Science of tiles that approach this area. So that's really where the hexagons came from, although it is a very important shape in chemistry and thinking about the way you draw out and diagram sucrose, which is very important for photosynthesis. So there are all these layers of meaning that came, the strongest shape in the built world. But literally I was about repeating a pattern at the site to make it kind of fit in. And John Pope, who I've worked with for many years, designed the boxes, and the exhibition team at the New York Hall of Science were the ones who very precisely and carefully built them out, 24 of them at the site. And they're still there. They're still there.
They look great.
Thank you.
They really look great.
Thanks.
I have a question for Colin.
Go for it.
Colin, Dawson City, Yukon.
Yep.
Googieville. I always, correct me if I'm wrong, those tailings, are they not, is there a place called Googieville where those tailings are?
Don't remember hearing of Googieville. There's a bunch of little towns around there, but I can't remember a Googieville. Yeah.
The reason I ask is, as I understand it, Googieville, the Googie, refers to the Guggenheim family. No.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that the Guggenheim family fortune came from Dawson, and the tailings on those mines are the legacy there. But I don't know if I was drinking when I heard that story or what. So
I have to look it up afterwards, to be honest.
Could have been.
That you know, right after this is done, I'm going to be Googling Googieville and trying to figure out.
I love that. I love that. That's hilarious.
There was, you know, a bunch of, like, you know, I guess the wealthiest families in the continent did sort of start out in, you know, from that. It was.
Gotta go where you gotta go.
Well, I mean, most people didn't do well, but you know, there was a select few that got in early that did very well.
Yeah, somebody did okay. Somebody made out okay.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Lucy. We have a question now from Sergey. He asks, how will the aesthetics of the laboratory scientific apparatus play off the natural setting of the Unison Garden site? And I would love it, actually, Matthew and Alex, if you guys could give your take on that. Is there something particular about the natural setting of the Unison site that makes this makes your approach particularly evocative? Or
Sure.
I know, Matthew, you've given quite a lot of thought to aesthetics.
Yeah. And thanks so much, Sergey, for joining us and for that excellent question. Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is I'm always sort of, I like to expand the term natural, right? Or put it in scare quotes at the very least. And my daughter may have something to add to that as well. But just because, you know, hold on, sweetie, I'm saying something. So, homeschooling. I say that because, you know, when we use terms like natural, we often use them as these sort of in binary opposition to something like cultural. And this dichotomy of nature and culture is a particularly Western one that doesn't exist in many other cultures. In fact, it's unusual for a lot of non-Western cultures to even have a word like nature, right? So I'm just often very cautious about the term, you know, nature and natural. And equally so about terms like invasive and, you know, and natural. But, you know, given that, I think thinking about aesthetics, not as the sort of within the narrow constraints of just thinking beauty, but aesthetics as like the broad regime of sensibility and how you sensitize people to forces that are active within a specific system. And I think, you know, to get back to what Brooke was saying, you know, the truly, I think, creative artists and scientists and people that work across those disciplines are able to design apparatuses, right, that sensitize us to these sort of unique complexities and beauty of these things. So for us, that means like a form of really radical site specificity, and not just in the sort of visual elements, but also the sort of systemic elements that are activating that, and looking at like what's growing there and how do you participate in like assisting that growth and flourishing. And I think we're all interested in that, right? And then that becomes part of the aesthetic of it. So not to produce a sort of plop sculpture that sits down and takes dominion over the area, but to move in cahoots and collaboration with all the really dynamic forces in a way that allows them to speak and participate in the project, both the human and the non-human. So I guess that'd be a start of my answer. And it's a process for us. And, I think it's something that we'll have to like consult with all the different agents and actors in this and figure out how to move forward with them. So that's a very abstract answer. Sorry.
That's lovely. Wow, Matthew, thank you. I know that you've given this quite a lot of thought. We will have to end, but I was wondering if there's another question, or if one of our other panelists would like to speak to that question. Oh, and by the way, Tessa Grundon who's watching on Facebook Live says, she's right. I just Googled Googieville. So, this is a real thing.
There's an RV park too called Googieville RV Park. I just saw.
Oh, great. Oh, so you're Googling too, huh?
I'm doing it right now.
Well, that is a very interesting, additional layer of meaning in your project, or at least in your research. Thank you, Lucy, for that. That's great insight. We have one question from Brooke, and this will be our last question. And by the way, if anyone would like to, just as a reminder, if you would like to support Owning Earth and Unison Arts, please make a donation, either financial, or you can contribute time, you can contribute materials to the installation process, and how to do that is posted in the chat. And it's also, if you're watching on Facebook Live, it's posted in the comments. So our last question from Brooke is, or from John, is for Brooke, and it says, Brooke, could you please speak to plant selection in urban carbon sequestration?
Yeah, so the study at the New York Hall of Science, which was our first one, all the soil is the same, and it's a technosol, which means it's human engineered, and it's a combination of sediment from a construction site. So it's glacial sediment from 20,000 years ago, that now there's a hotel there, and it's mixed with New York City compost from like the last year or two. So that, talking about compression of timescales, that to me has always been really fascinating. But all the beds have the same soil. So what we're really looking at, we're comparing the different plants and how the carbon levels change over time based on the plant combinations and the plant soil bridge. And the plants that we selected, we kind of mimicked it off a New York City community garden. So edibles were really important. And we chose okra and ground cherries. So those are two of the plants. And then we also were looking at cover crop, and it was a mix of about 10 different things that I replicated a farmer in Kansas, Kelly Griffith, who's kind of a evangelist of cover crop and regenerative ag. And it includes a lot of legumes and mustard and buckwheat, and some of the, they're all listed on the website, but 10 different cover crop. And then the third variable for planting was sunflowers. And we basically were looking at each of those on their own, and then each of those in combination. And then there's some beds that had all three variables in them. And each bed was replicated 3 times to make it a true scientific study that my collaborators can write peer-reviewed papers using the data. So that was year 1. Year 2, we moved into, I was just privately chatting with Matthew about this. We're looking more closely at sorghum, especially one that is developed by the Land Institute, like Matthew did already. So it's a similar collaboration, which is really exciting. And the reason we're looking at sorghum is because it's a phytolith, which means it develops silica in its leaves. And when that decomposes and enters the soil, it acts like a binder. So it's in many ways it accelerates the the sequestration process. And so it's also a perennial, those are the plants we're looking at currently. But as we're collaborating with a bunch of new organizations across New York City this summer, we will be looking at the plants that are already growing in these sites, which includes the Bronx River Alliance Foodway, Grow NYC Teaching Garden on Governor's Island, Red Hook Farms, and a couple of other locations. So those are a whole variety of different planting, cultivation, and also soil types. So we're going to be gearing up for a lot of different data this summer, which is cool.
Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Alex Young, Matthew Friday. Thank you, Colin Lyons. Thank you, Robert Beck. Really, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, you know, for the artists, I'm happy to forward them your questions. You can email me at owningearth@gmail.com. That's all. Again, thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of your Sunday. The next panel discussion, by the way, is May 31st, and that'll be on visibility and restoration, and it'll include the artists Maureen Connor, Eugenia Manuelian, and Landon, blanking on her last name, Jackie Summel, and Jean-Marc Superville-Sovak. I hope you can join us for that as well. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely day.
Thanks, Paul. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.